Okay, so in 2021, a group of demographers and social scientists wrote to the American Pew Research Center asking them to stop using labels such as boomers, millennials, etc. And they accused Pew of divisiveness and pseudoscience. Pew actually agreed with them, and by 2023, it said it would stop using these labels. It said the field of generational research has been flooded with content that's often sold as research, but is more like clickbait or marketing mythology. And it added that there had been growing criticism about generational research and the use of these labels that we're all familiar with. And that's true. And I was one of those critics. I mean, since 2010, I've been researching the problem of generationalism, which is a horrible word to say. But it refers to the way in which social problems are explained in terms of generations, or more specifically, generational caricatures. So, for example, I've looked in detail at the way that the baby boomer generation have been constructed as a social problem, responsible for everything, allegedly, from the crisis of the welfare state to the problems of the housing market, to problems of climate change, the political crisis, everything. So I think, yes, this is a generationalism, breeds a narrative that is poisonously divisive. It sets age groups against each other. Even within families, I think that's the worst thing, because generations aren't just cohorts, they are embodied within the people around us. And in the case of the baby boom generation, it's explicitly ageist as well. It encourages a sense of fatalism and grievance amongst young people. So it doesn't take young people anywhere. However, on the positive side, I have also sought to develop the potential of generational research for making sense of uncertain times, where older political and sociological framings, for example, left versus right, or kind of clear-cut distinctions over class, discussions around sex, race, all of these things have become muddled, and much less kind of clear than they were perhaps once understood. And I think that looking at generations properly can help us to understand something about history and time. It helps us to understand how people shape and are shaped by the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. So, whilst generational labels are overused and quite daft, I don't think the concept of generation is. I mean, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. And also, I don't think that we should ignore tensions that do exist or may exist between different generations in society. My current project is a book looking at the experience of young people. The working title is Growing Up in the Culture Wars. And it's about exploring how young people are coming of age today. So particularly looking, I suppose, at the generation that we normally call Gen Z or Gen Z. And these are people who are coming into adulthood in a time that does feel, I would argue, radically different to their elders. We are certainly not in the 20th century normal anymore. And I don't think we know as a society where we are. And we see various explanations for the difficulties experienced by this particular cohort of young people. There's a lot of discussion about technology. Jonathan Haidt's recent book, The Anxious Generation, has had a lot of publicity that tends to explain their problems in terms of social media specifically. We have discussions about the COVID generation, kind of shaped, but at the extreme, arguments that have just been irretrievably damaged by the impact of lockdowns. And we have discussions about the degree of kind of fractious polarization politically and culturally, and that exists at the moment. Now, I don't think you can isolate one of these things. I mean, I think, for example, trying to pick off social media as the determining factor, I think is a mistake. It kind of confuses more than it clarifies. But I think it is fair to say that this unease relates to shift in the normative taken for granted structures and beliefs in our society that is still kind of being worked through. And ideas around the meaning of, for example, concepts that used to be generally understood on a common sense level, sex and gender, race and racism, nationhood and citizenship, freedom and security, health and illness, and all of that, means that sometimes we do experience something as it feels like older and younger sections of society are talking in different languages. I mean, I asked my students about this the other week, and I said, where are the generational differences in discussions, that the way discussions are had? And the first thing that they mentioned was mental health. I think that's really true. I think young people have a very different kind of concept of mental health than, say, older people. Gender is another one. And we also know that the interpretation of history that, say, my generation grew up with is quite different to that my children grew up with. At extremes, this can seem like we're living in different realities and fuels the kind of standoffs, nearly finished, such as OK Boomer on the one hand or Snowflake on the other hand. Now, the thing is, just to conclude, I don't think we live in different realities. Pew's own research shows fairly weak identification with these generation labels, actually. And in daily life, work and education, we share spaces and have conversations. We're living through an intense period of cultural fragmentation, but we're living through this together. It might be most destabilizing to the young as they don't have the historical experience to counter it, but that makes the relationships with older generations more important. I think young people are actually crying out for wisdom and guidance. If, apart from anything else, there's something to argue against. So I would say that the bigger problem than the disorientation of young people at the moment is the defensiveness of older generations often, their preparedness to jump on board the bandwagon of this kind of year zero narrative that says older people have messed everything up, young people need to sort it out. To improve the intergenerational conversation, older generations need to stop apologising for the reality that they grew up in and present a stronger bulwark against the cultural trends that seek to detach young people from the past. And younger generations need to be more savvy about the ideas and initiatives that are propagated in their name as the voice of youth, the future, the right side of history, and so forth, and be prepared to engage and argue with their elders rather than retreating into safe spaces and echo chambers.